My name is Eric King. I am the Artistic Director of California Shakespeare Theater. I want to begin by acknowledging that all of us are gathered here from different places, both literally and figuratively. Cal Shakes is on Ohlone land. Many of you who live or work in the Bay Area do so also on Ohlone land. Indigenous sovereignty is fundamentally tied to this evening's conversation around Black liberation and liberation for all people. So since we canceled our season at Cal Shakes, we've been asking ourselves really just one question. What is a theater when it can't make theater? One thing that we know is that theater asks us to gather together, to be vulnerable together, to be brave together, which brings us to our direct address series. Just as an actor pierces the fourth wall to speak to an audience, this is our effort to gather all of us together in a collective effort to deal directly with the issues that we face as a community. As a legacy white institution that has long centered Western European culture, Cal Shakes has contributed to the inequities that are driving the current moment. And we want to be accountable for that. In the absence of our plays, we are committing resources in this moment to a sustained effort towards action and meaningful change. Tonight's direct address is the first in what will be a series of conversations on allyship and anti-racism. And it's our hope that many of you will be as inspired by these extraordinary panelists tonight as I have been, and that you will join us in our efforts. When we think about the role of our cultural arts organizations in this moment, we think of this quote from Tony K. Bambara. The role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the amazing Lauren Spencer, our moderator for this evening.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Eric, for allowing us to have this space tonight. And thank you to all of those who are joining us tonight in this conversation. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to lift up that today is the 4-year anniversary of the Pulse shooting in Florida. And that as we look tonight at how we can support ongoing work in anti-racism and allyship, that we really recognize that the Black members of our queer communities, with specific regard to Black trans men and trans women, that they are not always supported in the same way in our work, and that we lift that up in this conversation and understand that Black liberation requires the liberation of all Black people, and that liberation of all of us is necessary to have Black liberation. So I just wanted to name that and to pause in a moment of honoring those people who were taken from us too soon 4 years ago. So thank you for joining us. My name is Lauren Spencer. I am a theater maker and educator in the Bay Area. I use she, her, and I identify as a mixed Black woman. Before we get to a framework that we're going to be using tonight as sort of a compass for this discussion and introducing these marvelous panelists that are going to be in discussion with me, I'm going to pass it over to Fresh Lev White, who is going to lead us all in a moment of grounding so that we can approach this conversation from a place of presence and spaciousness. So Lev, thank you so much for being willing to lead us, and I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you, Lauren. Thanks for the introduction. Hello, everybody. So we just want to take a pause and arrive. So I'm going to ring the bell and then guide you through a couple of breaths. That's just to help us ground in this moment. And as we're exhaling, the invitation is to let go of whatever you don't need right now. I know it's been a long week and some of you probably ran here. So that's the invitation. And here we go. And taking a moment to breathe in fully, whatever that is for your body, and we'll hold at the top and release. Breathing in and release. Feel free to make noise. Breathing in And release, allowing our shoulders to fall as we let go. Breathing in. And releasing our body, noticing our feet on the planet, allowing the weight of our body to be, if we're sitting in our seats, in our legs, just really allowing the earth to hug and take away anything you don't need in this moment. And I'll ring the bell and come back, and just know that if at any time anything comes up that you are uncomfortable with or is overwhelming, you can always come back to breathing, touching your heart, offering yourself a hug, whatever you need to help you stay present. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Lev. So I want to just give us a compass to orient around for this conversation. And I want to touch on something that Lev just said about overwhelm. And something when Cal Shakes approached me about moderating this conversation, I thought about how overwhelming this moment feels for me, not only as a Black woman in the United States, but as someone who wants to be active. And I know that a lot of people from a lot of different positions are feeling overwhelmed because also, let's be honest, we are in the middle of a pandemic and there are a lot of things going on. So tonight's discussion is going to be about how do we activate ourselves into the next step around allyship and anti-racism. How does activation become a daily practice? And that daily practice can look like something very small on a local, individualized, personal, in my home level, or it might look like, how do I participate in a national conversation or a civic conversation within my community? It can look many ways, and we're going to talk about a diversity of tactics and different ways to approach that. But that the real orientation here is, how do we cultivate a daily practice of joy, of resistance, in the name of liberation, and specifically Black liberation, which is going to be the focus of tonight's discussion. And then how do we make that daily practice sustainable, right? Because if I'm feeling overwhelmed, it is hard for me to imagine doing this work on a daily basis for the months to come. And we really do, the eye on the prize is we have to be able to activate ourselves towards November and also beyond November, because systemic racism and anti-Blackness is not going to end with the election, no matter who steps into the office of the president. So that's the compass for tonight. That said, I want everyone to imagine that you are inviting us into your home and that we are reciprocating that invitation. So that said, please imagine that we are getting ready for dinner together. This is a big kitchen table. We're in the kitchen, it's the hearth, and we're ready to have a rigorous conversation about how we can hold ourselves accountable to kind and self-compassionate activation around Black liberation and the support of this movement in a way that will prepare us for ongoing work. So that is our invitation to you. And the invitation is to feel through the discomfort and the dis-ease that will come up as you encounter new ideas, as you encounter an interrogation of yourself, to feel through it to the other side, to a place where you might be able to take action from very small specific action to a larger, more general action. So you are really invited to bring an open mind and open imagination and a curiosity that will turn into activation. So thank you again for joining us. With that, I'd love for all the panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll jump into conversation. And also a reminder that if you are listening, you can post questions. I will do my best to incorporate ones that are flowing into the organic flow of our conversation. If we don't get to you tonight, Cal Shakes, the good people there, are taking it down, so it will be important to share those questions because they might inspire future conversations that Cal Shakes is hosting and actions that Cal Shakes is supporting. So Lev, why don't you start us off with an introduction, and then you can pass it on to another panelist.
Hello, my name is Fresh Lev White. I go by Lev. I'm here on a lonely land in Oakland, California. I'm a diversity trainer, coach, and mindfulness instructor. And that's I think that's all I'm supposed to say. Thank you, Lauren. Oh, Michael?
Thank you, Lev. Hi, folks. Michael Robertson calling from the Hudson Valley, Lenape land. I use he, him pronouns. I identify as white, and I work for a national initiative called artEquity, which provides tools and resources at the intersection of art and activism. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. I will pass to Jasmin.
Thanks, Michael. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Jasmin Hoo. I use she, her pronouns. I identify as mixed Asian and white. And I organize with Asians for Black Lives here in Oakland. And I'm a paid community organizer at APINC, working with the queer and trans API community. And I'm also an educator and theater artist. I will pass it to Meredith.
Hi, I'm Meredith Smith, and I am calling you from Austin, Texas, which is the ancestral homeland of the Tonkawa and Comanche people. I am a Undoing Racism trainer, organizer, facilitator for the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. And my background is in public health, so I have a lot of nonprofit experience. My connection with Cal Shakes is we've been doing Undoing Racism workshops through your network, and so I'm very honored and happy to be here. And I use she, her pronouns. And I will pass it to, is that all of us?
That is all of us. Yes.
That's all of us.
Thank you. So I want to start by just laying a foundation of this idea of allyship has been something that's been talked about for, I would say, at least a decade now. But it tends to come up in these moments. And there's a sense of what exactly does that mean and how do we move beyond passive allyship into active accomplishship, being an accomplice or co-conspirator in these actions. And Meredith, I know that People's Institute where you work, has recently taken sort of a shift from allyship into what does it mean to be an accomplice. So could you frame that for us in a few words, and then we can kind of open it up to what that might mean in this moment?
Yeah, so this is not so much a recent shift, but has recently come into sharper focus around allyship. And it comes out of an analysis of white supremacist culture and white organizational culture, where a paternalistic do-gooder kind of framework is very much a part of that framework. So part of disrupting that is a process of recognizing that a dehumanizing system dehumanizes everyone in that system. The impact of that is very different, radically different, based on race in this country. However, it is a dehumanizing system. So if I, as a white person, are considering myself generous and benevolent, and that's why I'm in this struggle, is to be a good person, there's really severe limits to that kind of frame. And a much more powerful frame is to come into a recognition of how racism has dehumanized me, and how this is a struggle, this work is for all of our liberation collectively. So there's an Aboriginal elder, her name is Leela Watson, who kind of summarizes this the best in this quote that I really love. "If you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together."
Thank you. Lev, I see you with a big smile. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, I thought that was beautiful. We've been talking about Conda Mason, who's a peer of mine she's a much more advanced teacher with me at the East Bay Meditation Center, has been using the word partner. So that we're, as Meredith was saying, that we're in it together, that you're not standing there doing something, or not standing there, but you're not doing something for me. So just like Meredith said, you're doing something for us. So thank you. I thought Meredith summed it up well.
Great, and that actually brings up something that I've been curious about, having many friends who are non-Black or who are non-Black POCs or who are white. How do we, because there is an importance around right now specifically, but always in resisting anti-Blackness and fighting anti-Blackness, how do we center Black leadership and frontline Black activists in our partnership, right? If I am here and I am, with my family, and, I say this, I have a white mother. If I'm with my family and it's all white folks, how do we in our daily practice center Blackness, even if we are not immediately with a Black person or next to a Black organization? Does anyone want to answer that? Weigh in on that?
Go ahead.
Oh,
Meredith.
Lev, go ahead. And then
I was going to say, that's a really big question, right? Because first we have this idea about race that is a construct. So first, understanding that we're all human and that we're all valuable and we all bring things. So it's hard to center Blackness or any other population when you actually already think you're different. So this idea, right, that we're different in the ability, in our abilities and or our rights and in our humanness. So I think some of it is really allowing Black voices and Black leaders to have a seat at the table and noticing what's coming up for you when you're having rejections or reactions to their experience. So that's one of the ways I think that would be really important.
Meredith, did you have a response to that? And then Mike.
Yeah, just to add and build on what Lev was saying, I think in a race-based society where white privilege has rendered white folk in general blind to how race operates and to how white privilege operates, unless we really consciously choose to find ways to disrupt that blindness. If we are in autopilot, that blindness is what's part of that autopilot. And so in our society, folks from the African diaspora, as well as indigenous folks, because the race hierarchy that has been set up by systemic racism and systemic white supremacy puts Black and indigenous folks at the bottom of that hierarchy, leadership, indigenous leadership and leadership of African descent has a particular insight and vantage point just because of what that thing does that we sometimes are blind to. And therefore, if we are co-conspirators, if we are partners in our mutual liberation, then there's an insight there that is absolutely valuable, and there's a leadership there that is required in order for our strategy to be effective.
Can I just add on to that as well, that when I'm thinking about indigenous peoples, I'm also thinking about our cousins to the south, that those children in the camps are also ours. And so just being really blatantly honest about the land that we sit on is part of an America that existed long before we arrived.
Thank you. Thank you for naming that. Michael, I know you wanted to say something, and I just want to also offer, because you might have some thoughts about this in your answer. If we are partnering, how do we bring the leadership in through action, right? Like how are we creating that space at the table? Or I would offer, how are we shifting from not necessarily even creating space at the table, but allowing Black people to have their own table where they get to self-determine, acknowledging that, the separateness is a problem ultimately that we need to address, but in sort of rectifying this hierarchy that Meredith was talking about. You can speak to that or whatever you're going to speak to, but I wanted to just put that out there.
Yeah, I appreciate this question. I think I'll start by saying, I owe about 70% of my political education to people of color, and about 80% of that is Black women. So as a white person whose political education has come from the leadership and contribution of Black women, it is a daily practice for me to reprogram my ideas of what leadership looks like, of what race looks like, about the preconceived notions. I literally have notes on the back of my door about, Michael, how will you be complicit or not complicit in racism today? How will racism show up? So on a very personal level for me in supporting leadership of color, it is first a daily practice of reprogramming. And then in my interactions with leadership of color, I have to be mindful of all the white tropes of the white supremacy that is built within my body. So that means for me, I need to listen more than I talk. It means I don't need to comment on everything Black people say. I need to name that anti-Blackness is a thing. I need to use the word Black and not be afraid of that. I need to interrupt toxic narratives that are happening when Black people are not in the room, but they're being talked about. There's a way in this country and in our field, unfortunately in the arts, that Black leadership is undermined. We see it as a pattern in predominantly white organizations left and right. So I really have to start with the personal for me, because I know I'm reprogramming. To your question about making space or leadership, I actually feel like this is a moment, if not when, for white people to move back. I actually think white leadership, we need to ask ourselves, should I be in the position that I am in right now? And if so, what are my anti-racist politics? What am I doing on a daily basis to shift the culture of my organization or the community that I'm in? So for me, I think it ranges that gamut from reprogramming oneself to actually asking myself, should I be in this role? Am I actually helpful? Do I have an anti-racist analysis that is strong enough to build a community that will name and upend white supremacy culture and anti-Blackness? I don't know if that helps, Lauren.
Well, that's a very nuanced and also lovely specific answer. Thank you so much. I think what comes up for me is also, I think about, everyone tosses around the Maya Angelou quote that's, when you know better, do better. And I think that I want to expand that in this moment, because I think also for daily practice for me and for, as you were just describing, for many people, is that the learning and deprogramming is a constant action, right? So every day I learn something, and then what is the resulting partnering action that goes with that? And then when I learn more, that action has to change and deepen, right? So that because I hear a lot of I'm listening and I'm learning, right? Social media is full of I'm listening and I'm learning, which is fantastic. But then what is the partnering action that you are doing through that advanced learning, right? Jasmin, I want to kick it over to you, because I know that Asians for Black Lives, that you are a part of, has some beautiful thoughts on the website about what it means to support Black leadership in terms of your support in your work around this. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. I mean, just to name, first of all, the Asians for Black Lives, or A4BL, as we call it for short, started just as a group of friends and comrades who have been organizing together here in the Bay Area, API folks who are organizing and we're friends with Black organizers here. And the Black folks here in the Bay said, hey, Asian friends, we need your help. We need your support right now. And so that came out of actual relationships with other Black organizers. So I think that's really important to just name and lift up, first of all, that it wasn't just like our idea or something, but that because people had built trusting relationships with those Black organizers also felt like they could actually ask for this support in a real way. And so that's where this all came from. So I think that's just to start with, that's really important. And the way we operate, we're an all Asian group. We're mostly East Asian folks, to name that as well. And, we're not always talking and organizing with Black people all the time. We have our own meetings and, sessions. And so we have to hold each other accountable constantly, and say, we were working on this statement the other day in response to George Floyd's murder. And we were getting a little caught up in some language and details, and someone was like, "Hey, y'all, like this statement is important for sure, but like, can we decenter ourselves a little bit right now and think about what is really important right now in this moment, and the urgency of actually just getting this out to the world right now." So having hold each other accountable. And then we are still in conversation in relation to Black organizers here in the Bay. A lot of Black organizers have moved from the Bay because of gentrification and other forms of systemic oppression, but there's still folks here organizing that we know, and we keep in conversation, and when they have feedback for us, we take it and we use it. And like you said, Lauren, we're not just listening, which is really important. I love the just shut up and listen motto. I need that a lot. And I think that's really important, but it's not just shut up and listen, then it's also do something about it. And just not having ego, like, right, okay, yes, you're right. When we showed up to that action, yeah, maybe we could have done this better. You're right. We are going to do better next time. So I think it is listening, but like you said, having that action and holding each other accountable and being open when Black people hold us accountable to what we say we're about.
Great, thank you. There's a question about sharing resources specific to reprogramming practices or deprogramming practices, and Eric will talk about this at the end of the conversation, but a host of resources will be shared with all of you who are with us afterwards. But I'm interested in that question because do any of you have something, like what is, and I don't mean to simplify it, because this is complex work, but in terms of when we talk about sustainability and daily practice, do any of you have something where you do something on a daily basis? Michael, you had talked about notes for yourself, but maybe Jasmin or Lev or Meredith, what's a building block daily practice of reprogramming this anti-Blackness that can allow you to do the work more fully and step into it more openly?
I can begin by saying that I have a compassion practice that I practice daily, regularly. And sometimes that looks like I'm probably going to go through a half gallon of water during this conversation. And sometimes that literally looks like going through phrases that I've learned in my Buddhist practice. And calling out also the descendants and the people who hold the Asians and from all over the world who hold that practice. I wanted to, if you don't mind, respond to something that Michael said about speaking and needing to speak. And when we know that we're enough, we don't have to talk over people. So it's something that happens, you hear, like, mansplaining, right? The woman says something and then the man has. Often that's coming from not enoughness. So some of that self-compassion practice can help you with supporting, knowing that you're enough. You're great just as you are, and you don't have to overdo in order to actually be helpful. You might actually cause harm. So that's I had to get that out. So, but otherwise, yes, I love that you walk the lake or you take a walk every day.
We were talking about walking earlier today, Lev and I were, as a practice. So I guess that is one of my practices of self-reflection and taking that space and time. Meredith, do you have a practice that you use?
Yeah, actually, Buddhist practice is also my central practice. I'm really happy to share that space here. So for me, it is a practice of directing my spiritual practice to this work, as well as my critical analysis. So I have done quite a bit of examination on what is white organizational culture, what is white supremacist culture, and identifying those things. And when I look at them from a Buddhist frame, it looks like ego culture, individualism, competitiveness, isolationism. All those things are also actually what my Buddhist practice is fundamentally polishing in me. So I direct my Buddhist practice to that, but I also ask myself when I have an interaction that goes a little sideways, or where I get triggered. I have something happening in my emotional body that I sense, and I don't like the way I showed up in that situation. I ask myself, Was I being a perfectionist? How was I being a perfectionist? How was my competitive? How's my need to be an expert? How's my insecurity around knowledge? And how's my intellectualism showing up? And then, as Lev was saying, this practice, this has been a ongoing practice to bring myself a lot of tenderness and a lot of grace in how I do that, because self-incrimination is just another side of ego culture and counterproductive. But self-examination can be quite productive when it's also held with that tenderness and that grace. And just I wonder how I could have done that differently. And then some accountability partners who I can talk with who are both white anti-racists and Black anti-racists, who I know I can come to and say, I really think I blew it in this situation. And let's talk through what this struggle is together. Absolutely. After I've done my own work first.
And when we're having these accountability partners or conversations about anti-racism, I'm looking at one of the comments and questions that came in. How do we, or I should say, how can non-Black people, but I think that this can apply to everyone, how do you differentiate between listening out of a space of, if I talk, I'm just going to say something wrong, so I'm listening to avoid stepping into my learning process, versus making space for the person of color or the Black person in front of me and actually receiving what they have to say? Do you all have thoughts about that?
That's a really beautiful question, because I think a lot of white listening in particular comes from fear of offending and fear of getting it wrong and fear of looking bad. And that's, of course, not the kind of listening that is productive. So for me, I think there's no shortcut to authentic relationship building. It's not quick. It's not easy. It's messy. We blow it. We recover. But it really requires that authentic relationship building that is reciprocal, that is give and take, where you're allowed to make mistakes, where you have the grace to recover. That requires time and energy and authenticity and risk-taking, being willing to take the risks, as well as holding space for deep listening and authentic listening.
Michael, did you want to add to that?
It's contextual, right? It just depends on the circumstance. I think, we need to end white silence. And I think that ending white silence is very different from, I should take up a lot of space all the time. I should be the expert. I know that this body represents the oppressor, right? So I can come off often as being the expert. I'm not even trying to, but I do. So I have to be mindful of that. So for me, I have to differentiate what is happening in this situation. Did someone say something blatantly racist? Am I just going to lean back and let the Black person in the room address it? Or am I going to fumble my way through it even if I'm nervous? I have to fumble my way through it even if I'm nervous. So for me, it's a difference between, am I talking just to talk? Is it additive? Is someone going to be harmed? Not do I think, was someone just harmed? Was there a blatant comment? So for me, it's very contextual, and I think it's a nuanced balance. But what white people can't do is lean back at a moment like this. In the small conversations with our parents, in the large conversations in the boardroom, wherever we are, it is not white silence is what has led us to the position that we are in right now. White people have not spoken up enough. Yes, we've got a history of white abolitionists in this country. Absolutely, we've got modern day practices, but if enough white people were actually not being silent, we wouldn't be in the situation that we are. But I do think it is the difference. Am I trying to be the expert and show off? Am I performing? Or am I interrupting a potentially dangerous or hazardous situation and speaking from my own lived experience, not on behalf of a Black person, but to say, I, Michael Robertson, feel that the comment I just heard, it hurts me. That hurts my humanity. So again, it's how we do it, so that we are not being the white expert or we're not speaking on behalf of Black folks.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to expand that a little bit in terms of, because I think something I've been interested in is how do we look at organizing as an individual practice, right? If I'm new to this work, if I'm just learning what anti-racism is, how do I, because action needs to be organized to make ongoing change. So how do I organize within my family? You mentioned talking to your family, you know, you're around the kitchen table and you're talking. I have very interesting conversations with my mixed family and they're very difficult sometimes. So I'm curious, and Lev, I would love it if you could kick us off in this section, but how do, in a small daily way, how do I organize around calling family members or community members to account, or sharing learning with them, or organizing within my family or my friend circle around action?
Thank you. A lot of questions have come in about that this week. And one of the things that I've been talking about is trying to meet people where they're at, and not trying to push people past where they need to be. So we are, of course, as intellectual as this all is, and we want to say these are the facts and this is what's happening, we're really dealing with people's hearts and sense of self. People are hearing, you're wrong, you didn't know that. So what I've been encouraging is actually maybe pausing with the people who aren't ready, sharing what they're ready to hear. If they can't take more, focusing on the people who are, and continuing to model who you want to be, because we can't change anyone and we can't force anyone to be ready to take in what they're ready to take in. So we offer what we think is good, but we don't want to get into battle with anyone about how come you're not getting this? And they're not getting it because they're traumatized in a system that teaches us scarcity, which means that if they're wrong, they're not enough. That's a lot of what I've been talking about this week.
Jasmin,
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Jasmin, do you have anything to add to that? I see you shaking your head vigorously.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you're sharing, Lev, about choosing your battles. Oops, sorry. Choosing your battles and having empathy, though, and really listening to where someone is at. I think that's really important. And I also want to, push folks, especially people who identify as Asian or Pacific Islander or mixed like me, to not let your just discomfort stop you, from having these conversations. Anti-Blackness is, all over the API community. A lot of our parents and grandparents and aunties and uncles, etc., constantly perpetuate anti-Blackness. And some of them voted for Trump, and have no connection to how the liberation of Black people is connected to the liberation of API people. So I think we have a duty to make as much of an effort as we can to connect to our friends, family, communities who we have those relationships with, because the truth is they are not going to listen to my Black friend about this. They're just not. They're not going to listen to the people on this panel necessarily. They're not going to listen to Lev. You know what I mean? They're not. And so, and because this is my mom or whoever, they also care about me on a more personal level. And so I have to use that as an opportunity. And I know for myself, I'm like, oh, I really don't want to talk to so-and-so about this. And I think it is good to choose battles, but also don't just choose to lead with your own fear and discomfort, because just Black people don't have access to the people that I have access to in those relationships. So I have to do it.
Thanks, Jasmin. That makes me think a lot about on the People's Institute website in their work, there is a note about gatekeeping and how do you take your power as a gatekeeper and transform your role into a cultural agent of change, right? Am I saying that right, Meredith? Great. So my thought is, what I'm hearing when you're talking is, you're the gatekeeper in some way of your family, and how do you leverage your power and your gatekeepership in that moment of between them and knowledge, or between them and change, or between them and asking them to do more, to step in. So I want to connect that to this idea of what does it mean to, when we think of gatekeepers, I think we think of someone in a leadership position that's traditional, which that is true too. But how can we think more creatively about our individual roles as gatekeepers within this work and how we might take action to transform that role in support of this movement? And that might, I know we have a lot of artists also listening, so that also might be valuable to talk about how we can work as individual artists within an institution, even though we don't see ourselves as a gatekeeper, some more subtle ways we might be gatekeeping in our practice. Thoughtful silence.
I think part of the process of becoming a liberated gatekeeper is a process of recognizing the power that we do have. We often imagine ourselves to be disempowered in a lot of different contexts in our lives. But when we come to recognize how we do have power, I think some of it's personal, like the way Lev was talking about, that I am enough and that I have the grace to treat myself with tenderness, and therefore I can extend that to others. But it's also sort of defogging our lenses and recognizing what resources we do have access to, whether that's knowledge or information or our connection to our faith-based community or our position in our neighborhood or our professional, whatever it is. And I think one thing that I've really learned from some of my civil rights mentors, old school civil rights mentors, is like, don't throw people away, you know? Everybody deserves to be met where they're at. And that's very much an expression of white culture that I've really struggled with, is this, oh, okay, you're wrong, therefore disconnect, isolation, separation. One of my accountability partners and co-conspirators in this work said to me after a workshop one day, actually after the workshop where in the Bay Area, she's like, you know, the Klan are your people. And I was just like, what? She's like, yeah, whose other people are they? The Klan are your people. So we all have to kind of stretch into that conversation that I always get stuck on with my dad. Like, I just can't get past that. Well, it's because I'm not meeting him where he's at. I'm focused on how I'm right and he's wrong. I'm not focused on his journey and how I want to nourish and encourage his journey, which starts where he is and moves to wherever he's going to get to next.
Right, and just to name that is work that is perhaps specific to white people and perhaps also more appropriate for non-Black POCs at this moment, but that is nourishing journey. We can be generous, but the labor of nourishing one's journey does not necessarily belong to Black people right now. Just wanted to name that for those listening. So I want to acknowledge some of the questions that are coming up, and again, we won't get to all of them, but I wanted to switch a little bit when we're talking about gatekeepership, specifically in organizational culture or arts organizations. There is a question about tokenization, right? We see a lot of, specifically in theater right now, I'll talk about theater because that's my realm. We've seen a lot of Black and POC leaders being elevated to leadership positions, but in untenable positions because they haven't been supported through the history of white supremacist culture. And so there's sort of a setup to fail situation going on. So how do we interrupt that as individuals? How do we take action to interrupt that and fight tokenization and fight this sort of setting people up to fail? How can we take action around that?
I really love the idea of actually challenging this idea that in white institutions, which are many, if not most of them, we're, as people of color and Black people, we're actually measured by our level of assimilation. and actually having that sort of raised up, and that that work can happen. This is such a beautiful time. So many people, out of guilt, fear, shame, whatever, are calling on Black people to come in and do work in their organizations, calling on white people to do work in their organizations. Now is the time to sort of go in and say, let's look at what your policies are and how you're setting up, how it's set up so that Black people and people of color and women in many cases can't meet your ideals, because your ideals are based on a white male performance, and for lack of a better term. That was just a little bit of what I'm sure people have brilliant stuff to bring.
Yes, Michael, go for it.
I think if you're in an organization, have any ounce of power, I think that before we do these searches, we have to ask some really fundamental questions. Do we think one person's going to change the culture? Does our culture already feel accepting to Black folks or not? And if not, we need to do that work first. And I want to credit Carmen Morgan, who I work with at artEquity, who constantly says, what is the culture? Is the culture ready for the leadership that's coming in? So if you're a board member or an executive leader in an organization thinking about doing a search, I think we as white folks and non-Black folks need to say, are we ready, or do we need to do some culture work before we bring folks in? Because it is really unfortunate, because white supremacy culture has created some structures that are very toxic. Organizations are in debt. They've followed these capitalist white supremacist structures for so long that they're almost ineffective. And the idea that you're going to put one person, you're going to put a Black person in charge and then move back and not do any work is actually reprehensible to me, I think. So boards need to ask themselves, as Carmen says, what are your anti-racist politics? Are you ready for this? And if not, just be a fierce, white, anti-racist board, and then it'll be easier to attract folks. So I think it's a mistake for people to be like, hey, let's just get a Black person to run. It's disrespectful. It's disrespectful on a good day, and it actually is extremely harmful on other days for those folks who are going into those. And then I would say, for those folks that are in those positions, if you know them, if you know anyone in those organizations, do everything you can to support that leadership. Don't let those folks in those current positions be undermined. So whatever leverage you have, use that, not to help them, but to support whatever they need, and ask, hey, how can I support? I actually know your board chair. How can I support in whatever way that you need? So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, speaking of Carmen, I actually see her on the Q&A, and I want to fold in one of her questions to this, because they're in sort of, though, if we're expanding, like, how do we become anti-racist within an organization? And I want to say that this really does apply to any organization, not just theaters, for those of you on the call who are not in a theatrical organization, or an arts organization. How do we have accountability partners or accountability conversations if I'm in an all-white space, or I would even argue a non-Black space? How do I strike a balance around not being in an echo chamber, right? Does anyone have strategies around that? With, we don't want to ask people to do labor for us, because that Black women in particular, but also just Black people in general, have been doing a lot of labor for free for a long time. But how do we also not, to your earlier point, Jasmin, just surround ourselves with an echo chamber of people who can't necessarily speak to everything that we need to be thinking about or positioning ourselves within? Anybody have strategies?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question, Carmen. I just peeked at your question. I think that for me, what has been most effective is to make multiracial, people of color-led anti-racist teams my core base. So that's the accountability baseline that I start from, is that work. Then from there, we go into POC and white caucuses, if you will, to do our own work, so that we're not leaning on people of color to do that heavy emotional, spiritual, intellectual lifting. That one of the side effects of white supremacy culture is a laziness and a mediocrity in white folks that becomes acceptable. And so we do that heavy lifting with each other, but then we come back to that multiracial, anti-racist, people of color led teams, and then it's a back and forth. So we go into the white caucus, we do our work, we work on racism, internalized racial superiority in ourselves, we butt up against all that white organizational cultural stuff and try to work it out with each other. Then we come back to a multiracial, people of color led, Black people led, anti-racist space, and we're going back and forth and back and forth. And for me, that's been the most effective way to minimize the burden of labor on people of color, and at the same time stay accountable. Because I've seen white anti-racist groups that don't have a strong connection to multiracial groups or people of color led groups go so there's really a requirement for both accountability and authenticity in relationship, and for us to do our own work and do our own heavy lifting and combine them.
Jasmin, thank you, Meredith. Did you want to add to that? I saw.
Yeah, thanks. I think those are really smart strategies, Meredith. And I know you've done a lot of that work, so that's really helpful. But I was thinking about your question initially, Lauren, and I think like the two things that popped up for me were, why do you want a Black person in this conversation? Or why do I want a Black person in this conversation? Like, would it just make me feel better and less guilty or something? Would it make me feel more down and like legit? Would it, like, what is my own internal stuff around that? So I think like acknowledging that first of all, and then, if you do want to, if the reason is actually to uplift Black voices and learn from them so that you're not an echo chamber. I also, the internet is pretty amazing. Like there are so many Black people who have chosen to speak on TED Talks or write articles or, make beautiful music and whatever, that you can listen to at any time. And that's like, anyone can access that basically, or anyone who has the internet can access that. And then I also would just say, once maybe you decide it is time to bring in Black folks into this conversation or in the work, I think it's really important to pay them, and pay them way more than you think you should. Because there's just so many layers, like you said, like Black femmes like having to do this labor for free all the time for so many people within and outside their communities. So just naming that.
Thanks for naming that, because that's the perfect segue to the economic element that I wanted to talk about. Because I think that this is important in a moment where we're all being invited and to donate, to support monetarily. And donating is fantastic, and also can be part of a larger sort of paternalist philanthropic model that doesn't allow people to be self-determined. So thinking about, because I have questions in the queue about, boards and wealthy patrons in organizations. I think that's specifically around theater, but also, boards and benefactors infiltrate all fields. So how do we either, I would say both and, organizationally, but as individuals, use our economic contribution in support of this work as an action, right? If I'm Lauren looking for a book to educate myself, how do I make sure that my education is also economically supporting a Black individual and their success? If I'm in an organization that has a wealthy board member who's supporting, I'll use theater for an example, the season planning, how do I ask for accountability around that and harness that wealth in a way that is supportive of building equity, that is really allowing everyone to be liberated and letting everyone be represented in a way that is positive?
I'm
Yeah, go ahead.
mindful. I'm mindful there are two white people on the panel, and just trying to
Absolutely.
holding back Lev and Jasmin just to make sure. I would go back to the quote that Meredith shared. Are you trying to help, or are you actually sharing wealth that I have gotten on the backs of Black people, a stolen people on a stolen land? That's what I keep saying. Where's my money going? And I've got a long way to go to really work that out. But if I am buying a book, who is the author? Where the profits go? I try to figure that out. If you are getting your articles written by Black women off of Medium, are you donating there? Like, let's just not pull all of these articles out and not think that someone has not spent time, emotional labor, that their life experience is in a handout for me so that I can be a better white person. We have to think about that. So I love the yes, Jasmin, Google it. We can Google it. We can find all those resources, but how do we actually acknowledge that there's a debt owed? There's a debt to be paid forever. And how do we find those moments? So I try to think too, when I'm donating, do I need my name attached to it? Do I need to be thanked? Do I need to get the cookies? Do I need no? And I think on the larger philanthropic level, it is about the redistribution of stolen resources. This isn't about helping people. So philanthropy is needing to learn from all the community fundraising happening right now, right? So all of these major foundations are going to have to rethink, because communities are like, hey, we're doing it on our own. We're raising hundreds of thousands of dollars just by crowdsourcing. What does that mean? So I think there's a way in which, as philanthropy is putting more and more money into social justice, into anti-Blackness, how is that money given and nothing is expected? That's what I want. No strings, no strings. Here's your chunk of money. Trust you, do what you need to. We get it. And I think that that's possible. And I think it's actually going to have to. I think we're going to have to turn philanthropy on its head. That boards don't make those decisions. The people who are most impacted make those decisions. And there are already creative people creating ways of doing that. This is not new. And of course, they're people of color and a lot of Black folks. So there are models we just need to replicate on a larger scale that exist in communities already. So.
Thanks, Michael. And if there are any funders watching, or theater leaders or board members on theater, I would challenge you to take that as a directive to direct your action in your organizations to create that very necessary change. Lev, do you have something you want to say?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. Really, from that level of philanthropy, looking deeper beyond the what is it, poster child Black person, poster child trans person, poster child people of color, and looking at what's actually happening within the organization and how are those people being supported before you decide to support a program that they might be leading or they might be a part of because it fits the narrative that works for you. I just wanted to add that in. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I want to say to that I think, that can be something you spend 10 minutes doing every day. Because I think that those ideas, for me, sometimes I'm like, oh, and now I have to know everything and I have to read everything. And how am I doing this when I'm homeschooling and I'm working and I'm worried about my financial health and the pandemic? But really, we can take bite-sized pieces and work towards a better, more active knowledge. So I just want to offer that invitation to everyone. Let me just take a look. I don't want to be losing anyone. Yeah, go for it.
I just want to lift up, as a former executive director of a nonprofit foundation, there are some foundations out there that are really trying to upend the model. There are some radical Black decentralized foundation-based movements. There's one in Baltimore I know of, and there's one in other communities where basically the Black community has created a foundation that's community-led, community-held, and distributes in a radically different way. So those models are out there, and that impetus is growing. So you can find them.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And can I just add one?
Yeah, please.
And just like where I work at APINC, it's a very small nonprofit. And something that I love is that we're all about trying to promote abundance mindsets over scarcity mindsets. And we switched after marriage equality happened. lots of funding left from, queer organizations, right? So since then, we've relied, half of our funding comes from individual donors who we know, who care about us and our work, right? And so, we're a small org, and we can like have some freedom to be more radical in that way, but just offering that, it's like, we're trying to escape the whole grant system, and city government funding by just asking the people we know and love to donate to us, and that we believe that there are enough resources within the queer and trans API community to support the queer and trans API community. So I know that's a little bit different than like thinking about Black folks and supporting them economically, but just like remember to dream, like that there's so many different possibilities, like boards don't need to exist, grants don't need to exist, like so many, there's just so many ways to be creative. And I think especially all the artists on this talk, use that imagination to dream really big. What could this look like if we did not have to depend on any money that was coming from white supremacy?
Thank you, Jasmin. That's really valuable to remember. So thank you for bringing that up. I wonder, we're talking about sort of, there's a crowdsourcing grassroots element to that, right? And then that makes me think of our political system, because we also live in a system that is in some ways built for us to fail or built to undermine the work that we are doing. And I think about our election coming up, both local elections and national elections. And so how do we take that sort of grassroots, I'm going to get my community together and mobilize outside of these pre-existing ideas of how to mobilize? How might we be able to translate that into political action in terms of looking towards the election and how we're engaging with our political system? Does anyone have thoughts on that? Michael, I see you have an idea. So as Jasmin and Lev ponder, I'm going to let you have some space to talk, because I also know that artEquity is working a lot on this. So
I feel there are just existing structures we can tap into, right? When we look at the movement for Black lives, they're literally telling us what to do. You just have to go there. Black folks are again telling white folks and others what to do politically. How do we defund the police? How do we look at mass incarceration? All of those things. So I would go to existing sources first, start with your close friends and have a dinner party over which 5 actions are you going to take that the movement for Black lives has already told you to do. White people do not need to make up stuff. We've already messed up everything already. Black folks have told us what to do. I don't know why we're trying to create new things. So white folks, let's just not do that. And I like to do that. I like to invent and create and colonize and all those things. And I've had to reprogram that. And the other piece is showing up for racial justice, which is a national anti-racist organizing space with pretty good accountability measures. They're also giving us cues. They're giving us lots of cues. And I found myself on a phone bank talking to rural white people in Georgia the other night. So that, because if we can tip 2% of the white population in Georgia, it swings the election. And we saw what just happened on Tuesday, the mess of the elections there. Georgia is such a pivotal state. So it's that, so you can phone bank. They tell you where to donate your money. They tell you where to show up for a protest. They tell you what to put on the sign. They tell you how to make a t-shirt. I mean, it really, that's what lit when a week and a half ago, I was like, what am I doing? What am I doing? Too many things, I was like, Michael, who's already telling you what to do? Follow the community organizers, follow the leads of Black people.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I also want to add with the protests, I know there's concerns about health with COVID. You don't have to be in the street. You can offer to pick people up and drop them off. You can offer to have water. You can offer, make pre-packages or medical packages that people can take with them. So there are a lot of different creative ways to be adjacent to these actions in a way that feels safe for you right now and your family. Lev or Jasmin? Lev, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just want to say that surprisingly last week, I literally got notes from my neighbors asking me what I needed, how they can support me, people that, some I talk to and some I rarely do. So literally reaching out, and again, like Michael was pointing out, asking how you can help and asking what people need. You don't need to recreate it. I just wanted to, and it can be that personal. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's great. I also, I know there's a lot of stuff going around saying check in on your Black friends. And I'm going to say that what do you need right now and how can I provide it is much more meaningful to me than how are you? Because honestly, I don't know how to answer that. So when
Yes.
when I had a friend say, what do you need? Can I buy you a coffee? What do you need? And I had a lot of feelings about that because I have a lot of privilege. So I was like, well, there's other people who need it more. But what I realized, and I'm going to say this for all the Black people listening and Black artists on the call and POCs, is that when people show me care, it enables me to do more work and to be refilled. So there is a sense of that community care is broad and expansive and we can invest in that. So Jasmin, did you have anything you wanted to add to that point? Great. What I'd like to do, oh yeah, Lev, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just want to say, because you just said it, not only don't ask me necessarily how I'm feeling, especially in the middle of everything going crazy, don't assume I want to hear what you're going through before you even ask me how I'm feeling, right? So like really providing space for the person, anybody who's going through trauma, we want to provide them with what do you need and begin from there. And if they decide they need to share, they will share. If they want to hear your story, because that's supportive, but really allowing them to lead. Thank you for that, Lauren.
Yeah, and Lev, I have a really specific question that I'd like to offer to you that came up in the Q&A, because I know that obviously not everyone who is with us tonight is white, not everyone is a non-Black POC. There are some Black people watching as well. And a question came up about internalized racism for, and I'm going to just quote this person's phrase because I think that that is appropriate, for melanated people. So
yes,
how do we engage with that, with all of these elements? I know that's a big question, but when we're talking about specifically internalized racism and how to engage with anti-racism and navigating allyship or accompliship, how do we deal with that? Honoring that neither of us are experts and we don't speak for all people.
Right. Oh, yeah, right. So I want to, somebody mentioned, I think Meredith was talking about, and I'm going to use a metaphor that that we're all like fish in water until we go out for air and realize that we're actually not fish, we're birds, right? So even people of color are within the system, and many people simply don't grow up. And I'm one of them who grew up as in such a multicultural experience that I was so aware that my Asian friends were getting harmed, my Puerto Rican friends were getting harmed, and my Italian friends and all these people were getting harmed, that I didn't really look closely at how the harm was happening to me. So that's created in me a gatekeeper. So I've getting back to that question. So how we meet people is, again, with patience, finding out where they're at, finding out what the best way is to support them with what's happening now. Because the other thing that's happening is a lot of guilt happening for people of color who are waking up and going, I didn't know, I didn't realize it was this bad, because they grew up in maybe white families, white communities, and it just wasn't accessible for them. Compassion will support every question that we have if we start with compassion and begin from there. As far as the people who are leading and are people of color, Black people who are leading and then perpetuating racism, that might be hopefully something that you can do in community with other people of color to call them into question. And sometimes you might have to call in a consultant for support. So I hope that answers, Francine. That was a wonderful question, and it's a long conversation. And one last thing, for the white person who goes, oh, well, that Black person says it's okay, stick with your truth, because you're going against what you actually believe. So don't use Black people who may not be quite aware as a scapegoat for you to perpetuate more racism. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. I definitely want to pivot to a practice of self-compassion and active self-compassion as active work. But before we do that, I want to give each panelist like 30 seconds to offer, like, what's one really simple action that I can do today to activate, to participate, to partner, and what is one longer term action. And it can be connected to organization, or it can be connected to community, or just my personal self, and just doing like a round robin about that, and then we'll pop back into discussion. Jasmin, why don't you start, and then we'll go to Lev. After Lev, we'll go to Meredith, and then Michael.
Okay, cool, thanks. One action you can take today is, especially if you live in Oakland, is to support the Black Organizing Project, a really rad organization here who created the George Floyd resolution to eliminate police in the Oakland Unified School District. We're getting close to making that actually happen. We can send out information about who to call, those board members, and they also have a board meeting on June 24th that people can go to on Zoom and support this resolution to happen to eliminate police from Oakland Unified. And then in terms of the long term, I was just thinking about Auguste de Boal, who created Theater of the Oppressed, and how he created the cop in the head technique. And so I think it's just really important to continually think about and reflect on the cop in your own head, your own internalized white supremacy, racism, all those things, and not just point your fingers at these officers or whoever, but to look inside with a lot of self-compassion, because it's very scary to face that, but with a lot of honesty and vulnerability, and just keep reflecting on the cop inside each of us, the white supremacist in each of us.
Great. Lev?
Thank you, Jasmin. That was absolutely beautiful. So without echoing exactly yes to everything Jasmin said, and looking if that's not the organization that works for you, there are many organizations right now that you can be looking into and supporting, including Asians for Black Lives Matter. And in addition to that, I'm just going to say, checking in with your heart, connecting with a spiritual community, whether that's intellectually spiritual for you, or you can actually align with your body and heart with different organizations. The East Bay Meditation Center is doing wonderful work. And the National Center for Lesbian Rights just brought in the first Black executive director who is doing work in raising up issues around Black lives in the QTPOC community and the LGBTQ community at large.
Great,
Thank you.
Meredith?
I would say, especially to white people, one action you can take is to have that difficult, risky, challenging conversation, whether it's a brother, a sister, a neighbor, a boss, a colleague, that conversation that you just know that you need to have, but it feels tricky. And then to do that self-compassion and that grounding practice first as a way to go into that conversation in a listening and meet them where they are place. Long term, I'm sort of a community organizer at heart, and the motto that one of my community organizing mentors has always stuck with me is change moves at the speed of trust. So building those trusting, authentic relationships with anti-racist partners, multiracial, white, just build those relationships, invest that time, divert from white organizational culture, which says it needs to be fast and have an outcome and have a result and have an agenda. Don't do that. Go have coffee, take a long time, meander all over the place, and just build that trust and build those authentic relationships so that's really what pulls the movement forward in the long term.
Thank you, Meredith. Michael?
Thank you all so much. I would say short term is just tonight, just research what's the budget of your police department? What percentage of that is your city? Has that been going up? And has crime been going down? Where are social service resources as a percentage of that budget? Know those statistics so that you can become a part of what it means to focus on humans and not focus on policing those humans. So just data collecting. Then your long-term strategy is to organize with people around what it means to redistribute those resources. So there's more going to the humans and less going to the police. And one way to do that, white folks, is to see if there's a local showing up for racial justice chapter. They have working groups within that. You can work on the prison system, you can work on policing, you can work on a bunch of different issues and commit to that. That keeps you going, other people doing that work. It's a long haul and it's ongoing and we're never done with it. So linking into existing organizing systems so that you don't feel that you're having to create it on your own is a long-term strategy that I support.
Thank you, Michael. In a second, I'm going to pass it to Lev to lead us in a grounding to close this conversation before Eric follows up with what resources CalShakes is going to provide after this conversation. And I'm going to leave a little space for Lev to talk about self-compassion as a daily practice in support of this. But I just want to say that I really appreciate everyone who has joined us and all of our panelists. And that also, I hope the charge here is to let go of the overwhelm and to really gather your people around a table, much as we are gathered tonight, and say, how can we activate ourselves? How do we make action as a daily practice and harness that collective creativity in your own communities, your sub-communities, your smaller communities, in a way that you feel like you can wake up every day and learn something and then pair that learning with doing. So thank you very much for being present and cultivating an ongoing presence and an ongoing partnership with this work. So with that thought, I'm going to pass it to Lev, and then after Lev is finished, Eric will come on and close it all out. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. And yes, as Lauren and I have been talking about throughout, the practice of self-compassion is a tool for sustainability. And I want you to remember, one of the things that happens, I think Meredith brought up scarcity in our culture, is that raising up and holding Black lives right now as a primary work for you and attention for you does not diminish your work. There is no competition here with like your suffering and our suffering. We're all suffering. And when we're in our self-care and self-compassion practice, it makes us available to both take in knowledge, but also to sustain the long run. So whatever your practice, your care practice is for you, please keep going. So let's just take a couple of breaths. And I want to encourage everybody, including the panelists, to let go, and our moderator and everybody, let go of any woulda, coulda, shouldas. It's impossible for us to do it all right now and get it right. So just practice some kindness, and we'll do our 3 breaths and release and beginning. Deep breath in and letting go. Deep breath in, taking in all of the love and access you have to breathing at this moment. Releasing anything that's challenging you that you don't need right now. And one last time, taking in all that's available, all of the good that came out of this conversation, and will come forward. And again, releasing any overwhelm that you can allow to let go. And thank you for your presence and your participation now, and we hope in the future. Thank you all.
Thanks, Lev. Hi, Eric.
Hey, oh my goodness, thank you all so very, very much. Thank you, Lev. Thank you, Jasmin. Thank you, Meredith. Thank you, Michael, for your collective wisdom. Thank you, Norma and Jennifer, for your translation this evening. Thank you, Lauren, for your remarkable guidance. And thank all of you. We were 273 strong tonight for being in community with us this evening. And lastly, as we all head into this weekend, we at CalShakes want to invite you to take this wisdom, this deep, profound wisdom that was shared here tonight from these amazing panelists. Take that with you, carry it with you. It is a burden, it is a weight that reminds us that we are alive. We ask you to honor this work, we ask you to honor this wisdom, we ask you to do something in support of this movement, whatever that looks like to you. We invite you to turn this into action.
I was totally just dancing to silence, wasn't I? Wait, somebody take my daughter away.